You were just speaking a moment ago about supermarkets, right?
Mhm.
And the sort of convenience overcoming our desire for beauty. It is interesting how everybody simultaneously knows that convenience is destructive of meaning, purpose, beauty, all of this kind of stuff,
Everything.
and yet choose it every single time. And it's the depressing thing about the swift tide of modernity is that it is irreversible. Like,
Mhm.
once cars have been invented, you just can't go back to a horse and carriage unless it's some kind of novelty with some poor abused horse in New York City running around Central Park. You can't go back.
Mhm.
How then do we regain what was so good about the love of the past now?
Mhm. Mhm.
Things like the letter writing, things like that feeling that absence makes the heart grow fonder. It's like if you spend so much time away, when you finally see each other, it's beautiful and romantic. Whereas today, now it's like, I've got to text every single day, and I've got to check my phone, and I've
Mhm.
got to, and it sort of has a totally different kind of vibe.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. How do you? Well, maybe we can actually talk about that convenience stuff as it applies more broadly to society, to art, to architecture.
Oh yeah,
and stuff.
well,
But
in fact, have you heard of the fake clock towers on supermarkets in the UK?
I've not. I mean, I've seen them.
So
I've
you know what I'm
seen.
talking about,
Yeah,
right? You've seen.
my Morrisons. I remember where I grew up, and there was the Scunthorpe. There was the Morrisons. I remember every time you drove into town, there'd be a clock tower.
So they've got these, like, they're quite beautiful. They look like village churches or something.
Yeah.
And they've got a clock tower, and it's like a Tesco. It's like a supermarket. It's like the equivalent of, like, I guess, like a Walmart or something or Target in the US. Have you ever noticed those clocks don't work?
Never noticed.
Those clocks, like, they basically never tell the correct time because they're not actually clock towers. What happened was, in the 1970s, a town in Essex, I pulled it up here, called South Woodham Ferrers, was being laid out in Essex. And there were, like, strict rules about what you're allowed to do because it's a nice little town. And so it kind of, I don't know the exact rules. It kind of had to look a bit like a barn. It had to use a particular brickwork. It had to be in keeping with the style of the town. And when Tesco come along and want to build a supermarket, supermarkets are known for being these horrible utilitarian buildings. And they said, no, you're not allowed. You have to make it fit in. So they basically faked this, like, beautiful looking building. It looks like a barn with a clock tower. And because they didn't actually care for keeping the time, most of those clocks just don't even work anymore. I'm not even sure if they worked in the first place. That's why if you ever drive past one of these supermarkets, see if the clock actually works, because half the time they're not even there. And this is an example of somebody sticking their foot down and saying, I know supermarkets are more convenient, but recognizing the trade-off that has brought. One trade-off is, of course, you don't go to the market and your individual salesman. And obviously that would be a massive pain if you actually need to get your shopping done. But there was something probably romantic about walking around, saying hello to your local butcher, But another thing that has been lost is the fact that because it's so utilitarian, it's just like one big building and it's a conglomerate that doesn't care about beauty. And so this is one example of how, knowing that, you can fight against it by saying, okay, you can build a Tesco, but you have to make it look like a clock tower. And the clock doesn't even need to bloody work. I don't care. Just make it look beautiful. Is there something like that we could do to bring back love, man, letter writing, all of that kind of good stuff?
I guess that's a wonderful example, and the kind of thing we should probably do more often. I mean, I think this conversation is so really overdone. Every single time you open your web browser or go on whatever BBC News, there's an article about how dating apps are causing all this harm and sending everyone crazy and stuff. So again, we all know it's a problem. How do you solve it? Well, I think in a way the good news is that it's not that hard, right? I mean, things are now also better than they've ever been before in so many different ways, and in many ways, all you have to do is just not use one, right? You just don't use the apps, and that forces you to actually live in the real world. Same with, like, the supermarket thing. Like, I can sit here moaning about supermarkets, but if I really wanted to, there are still butchers. I could go to the butcher to get my sausages rather than going to Tesco, whatever it is. Same with dating. You refuse to use the apps, right? It's scary. You've got to be bold. You've got to be courageous. You've got to live in the real world and take chances and see what the hell happens. But it can be done, and it works. I mean, we all know people who've met their partners in real life, which is, again, such a strange phrase to use, right? The idea that you have to specify, oh yeah, we met in real life. My partner and I have a very, very odd thing that we can now say in 2025. I don't think it's any more complicated. I mean, there may be some issues further down the line, and at the panel I did, there was some really interesting discussions where there was some men in the audience who I was kind of saying this, like just forget the apps, go out there into the real world and live and see what happens, and be willing to embrace the inconvenience of romance. And then some men in the audience were like, well, we feel uncomfortable approaching women and that sort of thing. And then we got into the whole, that kind of took the discussion in a different direction. I guess it's not really the kind of thing you normally talk about on your channel, although it's adjacent, I suppose. Issues of masculinity and toxic masculinity, and the relationship between men and women. I don't know if you want to talk about that. It's certainly a very interesting, but it's very depressing.
What do you think is going on? I mean, you mentioned earlier this. You said disgusting when you described. I can't remember exactly what you were describing, but it was something about the way that
it was about how when dating has been turned into something that you schedule.
Yeah, and like
it's the whole sort of podcaster, for want of a better word. I realise that's low hanging fruit to say that, but the sort of mentality of like you wake up at this time and you do this and then you do this, and the whole productivity, the whole spectrum of productivity, which on the whole I guess has been good for people, but the whole productivity way of being and thinking, which I guess has taken over the world, or at least the West, I guess, in the last 10 years, has pushed out. And I think that's what when I used the word disgusting, I meant the way romance has been turned into something you can schedule.
What's so resonant for so many people then, like with things like the manosphere and the dating market and the optimizing for approaching women and all of this kind of stuff? Like, why is that exciting to people if the thing that used to excite people were stories about people sneaking off in the night to elope with their lover?
Sure. I mean, those stories still do excite people. I mean, just look at what's on in the cinema, the kind of things people watch when they're at home on Amazon Prime or whatever it is, wherever we get our TV these days. The romantic stuff hasn't changed much, I don't think, in the last 3,000 years, since the dawn of storytelling. Romance stories have been more or less the same. Why do you find it exciting? Like, why does it appeal? The kind of the manosphere way of being. I think, gosh, where to begin? I think one is that the alternative probably hasn't been presented. Like, this stuff is kind of about education. Like, I'm not saying I'm exactly a paragon of romantic love and sort of a different kind of masculinity. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I definitely have a different view to a lot of people my age, a lot of young gentlemen our age, and that's probably just because when I was a young boy, I spent most of my time in secondhand bookshops, like reading these old books, and I think through them I got a kind of education, like unwittingly, but I got a different kind of education than I would have got had I spent all those formative years watching sitcoms, or as young people do now, just scrolling Instagram. I think without meaning to, I kind of stumble into a slightly different, slightly more old-fashioned, but I think fundamentally timeless way of thinking about things. Again, I don't uphold all these values, and I'm not even saying that it's about values, but just ways of thinking about the world and ways of being. So I think it's to do with education. If people haven't ever seen anything different, how could they know that there is anything different?